My brother laughed when I asked him to feed my cat for one weekend. "We're not your pet sitters," he said. This, after I'd been paying his half of our parents' mortgage for 3 years and co-signed his car loan. So I made 2 phone calls, one to my bank, one to my attorney, and I let the consequences find him on their own. This is where it really starts. And trust me, you won't want to stop here. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss how this ends. And hey, where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments. The notification sound on my laptop was almost offensively cheerful for a Tuesday morning. I was already on my second cup of coffee. Already behind on 3 client emails. Already calculating how I was going to survive the next 5 days while my husband Owen was in Seattle for a software conference. The notification was from my veterinarian's office, a reminder that my cat, Pepper, was due for her annual checkup and boarding vaccines. Boarding. The word made my stomach drop before I even had time to process why. Owen and I had planned this trip to Savannah for 8 months. Our 5th wedding anniversary. A long weekend at a bed and breakfast on the riverfront. The kind of trip you promise yourself every year and keep postponing because life keeps happening. The trip was in 11 days. Pepper needed someone to stay at the apartment, or at least stop by twice a day while we were gone. She was 11 years old, diabetic, and required insulin injections every 12 hours. Professional pet sitting services existed. Of course, I'd looked into them before. The good ones, the ones I trusted with a medically fragile animal, ran about $80 to $90 a day. For 4 days, that was close to $400 on top of an anniversary trip we'd already stretched the budget to afford. There was another option. My brother, Daniel. He lived 12 minutes away. He worked from home 3 days a week. He had stayed with Pepper before. Twice. When she was younger and healthier and didn't need injections, I had shown him how to administer them last Thanksgiving. Just in case, he had said. And I remembered this clearly. Of course. Nina. She's family. I picked up my phone. My thumb hovered over his name for longer than it should have. I knew that feeling, the low hum of dread that lived in my chest whenever I had to ask Daniel for anything. It wasn't that he was cruel. Not overtly. It was that he had a way of making you feel like every request was an imposition, an unreasonable tax on his time and goodwill. Even when your goodwill had been propping up his entire life for years, I called him anyway. It rang 4 times. He picked up sounding distracted. Like I'd interrupted something important. Though I knew from experience he was probably just watching TV. Hey. What's up? Hey. So Owen's conference is in 11 days, and we're doing our anniversary trip right after. I need someone to check on Pepper while we're gone. Just twice a day for the insulin. I've written out all the instructions. It takes maybe 10 minutes each time. Nina. He cut me off. There was a pause. The kind that's designed to make you feel foolish for asking. That weekend is Kyle's birthday thing. We're going to the lake. Kyle was his college friend. The lake trip happened every single year. And every single year it was apparently more sacred than anything I had ever needed from him. It's just twice a day, I said, keeping my voice even. You wouldn't even have to stay over. Just swing by in the morning and evening, he laughed. It wasn't a warm sound. Come on. You can't afford a pet service, you and Owen both work. This isn't really my problem to solve. He paused. Then added, as if it clarified everything. We're not your pet sitters. I went very still. The words sat in the air between us. And I felt something happen inside me that I hadn't expected. Not the familiar deflation. Not the resigned acceptance I usually reached for when Daniel disappointed me. Something colder and cleaner took its place. something that had been building for a long time and had finally, quietly, run out of patience. "You're right," I said. My voice surprised me flat and completely steady. Like a door closing. "You're not. Nina. Don't be dramatic." I hung up. I sat at my kitchen table and looked out the window for a moment. Pepper jumped up beside me, butting her gray head against my arm. And I scratched behind her ears automatically, while my mind worked through everything, with the same methodical calm I used in my job as a contracts administrator. I was very good at identifying when an agreement had been violated. I was very good at understanding who held what, and what leverage actually looked like on paper. I had been managing the soft infrastructure of Daniel's life for so long that I had stopped noticing the weight of it. But it was there. It had always been there. And the casual contempt in his voice, "This isn't really my problem to solve," had finally made the weight visible. I picked up my phone again. My first call was to Happy Tails Pet Care. To the premium service. I'd looked up and dismissed as too expensive. I booked 4 days of twice-daily in-home visits with a medically certified pet care specialist. The total cost was $380. I read out my credit card number without hesitating. My second call was to my bank. "I need to review the automatic payment I have set up for a joint loan." I said, "Account ending in 4,471. To understand what happened next, you have to understand how we got here. And that means going back further than the phone call. It means going back to the version of my family that existed before I understood what it was. Growing up. Daniel and I were 2 years apart. Close enough in age that people assumed we'd be close in spirit. We weren't. By the time we were teenagers, the dynamic was already fixed. I was the one who studied, who kept a planner, who held a part-time job at 16 and saved for my own laptop. Daniel was the one who was charming, who my parents lit up around, who could get a failing grade and have it explained away as the teacher's fault. I didn't resent it then, I just adapted to it. The way you adapt to weather. My parents, Robert and Carol, were not wealthy people, but they were not struggling people either. They had a modest house, 2 paid-off cars, and a pension my father had earned over 30 years in local government. The problem was Daniel. Specifically, the financial black hole that Daniel had become by his mid-20s, a business idea that went nowhere and left behind a personal loan my parents had co-signed. A car accident, his fault, underinsured, that ate through their savings. A lease he'd broken that they'd quietly paid off to protect his credit. By the time I was 28, my parents' careful financial stability had been quietly dismantled, piece by piece. To absorb Daniel's fallout, I found out the extent of it when my mother called me one evening. Her voice carefully measured in the way that meant she was trying not to cry. "We're a little behind on the mortgage," she said. "Just temporarily. Your father's pension adjustment is coming, but not until the spring." I drove over the next day. I sat at their kitchen table and went through their finances with the same attention I gave to contracts at work. What I found was not a temporary shortfall. It was a patterned 3 years of small diversions. Loans forgiven. Expenses absorbed. All flowing in one direction. Toward Daniel. I didn't yell. I didn't list grievances. I looked at the numbers and I built a solution. Because that was what I did. I set up a direct contribution to their mortgage, a fixed amount every month, coming out of my account, enough to cover the gap and keep them stable. I also, at my parents' tearful request, co-signed a refinancing agreement on their home loan to get them a better interest rate. My name was on that document. My credit score was tied to that house. I did it because they were my parents, and because I thought it would be temporary. That was 3 years ago. It had not been temporary. 12 months in, my parents had stabilized. Their pension was covering their own expenses. And I had assumed, without ever formally confirming, that my automatic monthly contribution was no longer necessary. Then I checked my bank statement one afternoon and realized I was still sending it. I had set it up and forgotten to revisit it because I was busy. Because I trusted that someone would tell me if it was no longer needed. Because I was the kind of person who set things up and kept them running and assumed the people they were running for would have the decency to say something. No one had said anything. I had mentioned it. Gently. To my mother at Easter. She'd said they still relied on it. That the pension wasn't quite covering everything. That they'd let me know when they didn't need it anymore. I accepted that. I didn't investigate. Then there was Daniel's car. His had died 18 months ago, engine failure. High mileage. His own neglect. He'd needed a replacement to get to his job at the time. A project management role he'd eventually left for reasons that were never entirely clear. My parents couldn't co-sign again. Their credit had only recently recovered. He'd called me with the kind of voice he used when he'd already decided the answer was yes and was just waiting for me to confirm it. I just need you on the loan as a co-signer. I'll make all the payments. You won't even feel it. I should have said no. I knew I should have said no. Instead, I said yes. Because he was my brother, and I thought that meant something. And because I still believed. Somewhere in a part of myself, I hadn't examined closely enough. That one day the ledger would balance on its own. The loan was in both our names. I was equally liable. He had, to his credit, been making the payments on time. But my name was on a $14,000 debt that I had no control over and no benefit from. After I hung up on Daniel, I went and retrieved the original loan documents from my filing cabinet. I read them carefully. Then I called the lender. I didn't cancel the loan. I couldn't unilaterally do that. And I wasn't going to do anything rash. What I did was request a full account review. Update my contact information so that all correspondence came to me directly. And ask very specific questions about what the process would look like if a co-signer requested to be released from a loan where the primary borrower had sufficient credit standing. Daniel's credit had recovered significantly over the past 18 months of on-time payments. He might actually qualify to refinance in his name alone. Whether he would want to was a different question. But the machinery was now in motion. And I understood exactly what buttons I could press. Then I called my bank and requested a review of all automatic payments linked to my primary checking account. I identified the mortgage contribution and flagged it for review. Requesting documentation from my parents' end before the next disbursement. I explained that I needed to verify the funds were still necessary and being used as intended. The representative was polite and efficient. The payment was flagged. It would not go out on the 15th as scheduled. I closed my laptop. Pepper was asleep in the patch of afternoon sunlight on the rug. The apartment was very quiet. Owen called that evening, and I told him what had happened, keeping my voice steady while I relayed the conversation. There was a silence on his end that I recognized as him choosing his words carefully. He actually said, "We're not your pet sitters." Owen said finally, word for word. After the mortgage contributions, and the car loan? Yes. Another silence. What did you do? I told him. When I finished, he said something I hadn't expected. He didn't say good or finally or any of the things that would have felt like vindication. He said, "Are you okay?" And I realized that was the strange part. I felt clear in a way I hadn't felt in years. The following day, my phone rang at 10 in the morning. My mother, he let it ring. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. And I needed to know more before I had it. Her voicemail was careful and warm, which told me Daniel had already called her. "Honey. Just checking in. Daniel mentioned you two had a little misunderstanding about the cat. I'm sure it's nothing that can't be worked out. Give me a call when you have a minute. Oh. Also, your father was wondering if you could look at the gutters when you visit the one above the back door, is pulling away again. Not a word about what Daniel had said. Not a word about what I'd done. Just a gentle redirect and a new task waiting for me at the end. I saved the voicemail and did not call back. That afternoon, Daniel texted, "Hey, I think you took what I said the wrong way. I didn't mean anything by it. I just can't do that weekend. It's been planned for months. Can we talk?" I read it twice. Then I put my phone face down on the desk and went back to work. He called twice the next morning. I ignored both. By noon, a text from my mother, Nina. "Your brother is worried you're upset with him. He feels terrible. Can you just call him so we can clear the air?" I noticed the framing. Daniel feels terrible. Daniel is worried. As though I were the weather. Something to be managed and soothed. A disruption to his comfort, rather than a person who had been told her needs were not worth 12 minutes of someone's morning. I was nearly at the end of my rope for the way this family had always worked. But I had one more piece of the puzzle to gather before I was ready to have any conversation. I pulled up 3 months of bank statements. My contribution to my parents' mortgage had been going out like clockwork, $600 a month. 7美元. 200 inches, the past year alone. On top of the original 3 years of payments, I had never asked for documentation about how it was used. I had trusted the arrangement. Then I did what I should have done a long time ago. I called my parents' lender directly. Using the account information I had from the co-signed refinancing documents, I explained I was on the loan as a guarantor and needed to verify the current payment status. The loan was not behind. In fact, it hadn't been behind in over 22 months. My parents' pension, supplemented by some retirement savings I hadn't known existed, had been covering the mortgage on its own for nearly 2 years. My $600 a month had been going into their general account, not to the mortgage, to their general expenses. I thought about the new patio set I'd seen in their backyard at Christmas, the week-long trip to Florida they'd taken in February, the way my mother had mentioned, casually, that she'd signed Daniel up for a premium subscription to a project management software platform to help with his freelance work, paid for with what I could now reasonably conclude was my money. The rage I felt was not hot. It was cold and precise, like a scalpel. I had not been helping my parents through a rough patch. I had been funding a comfortable life that had never needed my help. While my own anniversary trip was being budgeted carefully, and my brother was telling me to hire someone else to handle my problems, I forwarded the lender's information to my attorney, a woman named Diane who I used for contract work. I explained the situation. She called me back within the hour. The cosign on the mortgage doesn't give you direct claim on the funds. But if you're making voluntary contributions under a false impression that there's a need that doesn't exist, that's worth a formal conversation, she said. I'd recommend a letter. I told her about Daniel's car loan too. She said she'd look at both. "What do you want the outcome to be?" she asked. I thought about it. I want to stop being the foundation of a building that everyone else gets to live in. She was quiet for a moment. "That's clear enough," she said. I turned my phone back on that Saturday. There were 11 missed calls distributed among Daniel, my mother, and one from my father, which was rare enough that I noted it. There were 7 text messages. I read them all without responding. I called my father back first. He answered immediately. "Nina." His voice was strained. "Your mother is very upset. She says you've stopped the bank transfer." "I have," I said. I called the lender. "Dad, the mortgage has been current for almost 2 years." Silence. "Where has the money been going?" I asked, keeping my voice level. A longer silence. We've had some additional expenses. Daniel's software subscription. I said, the Florida trip. The patio furniture. He didn't answer. Which was its own answer. I'm not angry at you. I said, and I meant it. Mostly. But I think we need to talk about this properly. All of us. Can you and Mom come over Sunday, Daniel, too? No. Just you and Mom. There was a pause while he processed the implication that I knew Daniel was the subject of the conversation. Not an attendee. All right. He said quietly. I told Daniel I needed a few days and that I would reach out when I was ready. He sent back 3 responses in 5 minutes, escalating from confused to defensive, to a long paragraph about how he had always been there for me, and this was a huge overreaction to a simple scheduling conflict. I read all of them. I responded to none of them. Sunday at 2 o'clock. My parents sat on my couch. My mother had clearly been crying recently. My father looked like a man braced for impact. I had coffee ready but did not make a production of offering it. I sat across from them. On the coffee table, I had placed 3 documents in a neat row. My bank statements from the past year, highlighted. The printout from the lender showing the current and historical payment status, and a 1-page summary my attorney had prepared, outlining my rights as a co-signer on both the mortgage refinancing and the car loan, and the steps I intended to take. My mother saw the documents, and her hands went to her lap, fingers lacing together. I want to be honest with you. I said, I've been making that transfer every month because I believed it was going to the mortgage. I never asked for verification because I trusted you. The lender told me the mortgage has been current for 22 months. I've contributed approximately $13.200 since then for a need that no longer existed. My father's jaw worked. Nina, we meant to tell you. When I asked, he had no answer. I want to be clear that I'm not here to punish you. I said, I'm here because the way things have been arranged isn't working. And it has to change. Here's what I'm doing. The monthly bank transfer is canceled. Effective immediately. I've already done that. I tapped the second document. I've asked my attorney to begin the process of removing me from Daniel's car loan. The lender confirmed he may qualify to refinance on his own. That process is in motion. My mother's eyes filled. You're removing yourself from his loan. What if? If his credit isn't sufficient, he'll need to find another solution. I said, that solution is not my name on a debt I have no stake in. He needs that car for work, I know. I said, and I hope he keeps it. But my name comes off. My father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. He looked old in a way I hadn't noticed before. What about us? He asked. The mortgage, we can cover it. I want you to know we can cover it, but we've gotten used to having the extra. I know. I said again. And I understand that a budget adjustment is uncomfortable. But you have a pension. You have retirement savings. You've been managing fine. What you've been doing is using money I thought was going somewhere specific to fund expenses you didn't need my help with. I paused, including things for Daniel. My mother made a small sound. My father pressed his lips together. I love you both. I said, this is not me walking away. This is me drawing a line that should have been drawn years ago. I gave them a moment. Then my mother looked up, and her expression had shifted from distress to something more complicated, a flash of the quiet resentment that surfaced sometimes when I drew any kind of boundary. We gave you everything when you were growing up. I know you did. I said. And I kept my voice kind, but I did not back down. And I've been grateful. But that's not a debt that means I fund the rest of your lives without transparency or accountability. That's not how love works. My father reached over and touched my mother's arm. She went quiet. We sat for a moment in silence. That was heavy, but not hostile. Then my father said, "What about Daniel? Daniel is a separate conversation." I said, "This one is about the three of us." They stayed for about 40 minutes. When they left, my mother hugged me stiffly, and my father held on a little longer than usual. I stood at the door and watched them back out of my driveway and thought that this was what honesty felt like, not comfortable. Not warm, but clean. What I had not anticipated was Daniel. He had apparently been waiting in their car. I had not seen it parked down the street. My parents were halfway to their vehicle when he got out and walked across my front lawn. His face tight, to his hands in his jacket pockets. "Really," he said. "You pulled Mom and Dad in for some formal meeting about money and didn't even invite me." Owen was behind me before I'd fully registered Daniel's approach. He stepped up quietly and stood beside me. And I was grateful for that without needing to say it. "This is private property," Owen said. His voice was calm, but there was nothing soft in it. Daniel ignored him and looked at me. "You're taking your name off my loan. Do you know what that does to me if I can't refinance? You're gonna blow up my credit because you're having a tantrum about your cat. This has nothing to do with Pepper." I said, "It has to do with the fact that I've been a co-signer on a debt I get nothing from. A contributor to a mortgage that doesn't need me. And the person your whole family calls when something needs fixing, while being told my problems aren't worth a 15-minute drive." I said I was sorry. "You didn't." "Actually," I said, "you said I took it the wrong way." He blinked. That had landed. The loan review is already in motion. I said, "You have strong credit from 18 months of on-time payments. There's a good chance you can refinance without me. I hope you do. But either way, my name is coming off. I have a letter from my attorney, if you'd like the formal version of this conversation." Daniel looked at me for a long moment. He looked at Owen. He looked at my parents, who had stopped by their car and were watching with the uncomfortable expressions of people who had created a situation they could no longer manage. "You know what you are," he said, his voice dropping. "You've always been like this. Everything has to be a transaction with you. Everything has to be tallied up." Something settled in me at that. Deep and certain. "You're right that I've been keeping track." I said, "The difference between us is that you never thought you had to." I stepped back inside. Owen followed. I closed the door. Daniel stood on the lawn for a moment. I watched through the side window, and then he walked back to my parents' car. I could see my mother reaching for his arm. I couldn't hear what they were saying. After a few minutes, the car drove away. Owen put a hand on my shoulder. "You okay?" "Yes," I said. And it was true. The aftermath moved more slowly than I expected. And more completely. Daniel was able to refinance the car loan in his own name. It took 6 weeks and a slight uptick in his interest rate. But it went through. The lender sent me a formal release letter, and I signed it and filed it in the same cabinet where the original had lived. My parents adjusted to the new arrangement. There were a few stiff phone calls in the first month. A few awkward silences at a dinner we had in early spring. But something had also shifted in the way my father spoke to me, a directness. A kind of wary respect that I hadn't been the recipient of before. He stopped routing requests through my mother. When he needed something, he called me himself and asked plainly. My mother took longer. She had built so much of her identity around the idea of her family as a seamless unit, smoothed over by her quiet management of everyone's feelings. My refusal to be smoothed over was, I think, genuinely disorienting for her. But she was not a bad person. She was a woman who had made the easy choices for so long that she had stopped noticing how they cost me. 6 weeks after the confrontation, I came home to a voicemail from her. She didn't mention money or Daniel or the meeting. She said she'd been thinking about how often she'd asked me to handle things without asking how I was doing. She said she missed talking to me about things that weren't problems to be solved. She asked if I wanted to have lunch. Just the two of us. I listened to it twice. Then I called her back. As for Daniel, we were not close after that. And I made my peace with it. He got his refinancing. He had his lake weekend with Kyle. He sent me a brief text on my birthday in July that said, "Happy birthday." Hope Savannah was great. No mention of everything else. No apology. No reckoning. Just a pivot to normal. As though the ledger could be cleared by simply choosing not to look at it. Maybe for him it could. That wasn't my problem to solve anymore. Owen and I had our anniversary trip. Pepper did beautifully with the pet care specialist, a calm, meticulous woman named Jean, who sent us photo updates twice a day and administered the insulin like a professional. The total cost was $380, and worth every cent. On the last evening in Savannah, Owen and I were sitting on the balcony of our room overlooking the river. And I was thinking about the version of myself who had hovered over Daniel's name in her contacts with a familiar knot of dread. I had spent so many years believing that being the reliable one, the fixer, the person who showed up, that those things were just my role, permanent and non-negotiable. Like a load-bearing wall, you don't question because the building is still standing. What I hadn't understood was that a wall can hold a building and still have the right to say, "This is as much as I carry." The building does not get to ask for more, just because I haven't walked away yet. The river was orange, with late light. Owen refilled my glass without being asked. I didn't feel triumphant. Exactly. What I felt was settled. The chronic low-grade tension that had lived in my chest for years, the brace for the next request, the next guilt trip. The next thing I would be expected to absorb was quieter than it had ever been. I hadn't stopped being someone's sister or someone's daughter. I had just stopped being their bank. Their safety net. Their infrastructure, without their acknowledgement. Without their honesty. And without a single thank you. The peace that came with that wasn't loud. It didn't need to be.